In this video, I'll show how to create a production-ready web application in a few simple steps. For this, I first create a micro app. I name it 2-kilometer run. Micro apps are small reusable pieces of user interface. They consist of vanilla HTML, JavaScript, and CSS code. Let me show you how this works. First, I define some HTML. For now, just a heading and a button. If I head over to the CSS tab, I can change the appearance of elements in the HTML. For instance, add a color to the heading. If I go to the JS tab, I can interact with the elements defined in the HTML using jQuery. For instance, I can add a click listener to the button. I use the data action attribute to identify the button. And define the listener function. Okay, just got to type it right. Okay, now note that I provide additional argument elem here. This executes a jQuery query in the context of the app and not the whole page. Now I just let it display an alert here. And you can find more infos about how to work with micro apps and write JavaScript for them by looking at the documentation, which can be accessed through the help button. As you can see, we learn about how to write the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript for these apps. Now I can go to the preview by going here, and I can test the preview too. You see the alert comes up when I click the button. So, but now to the core of what this app should do. We want the user to be able to enter lap times and then calculate an average for all the laps which they have run. One thing missing in our app is a way to enter the times for multiple laps. We do this by creating a second micro app. I call it laps list. Here in the HTML, I add an input to provide a time. And a button to submit it. And finally a div where the times can be listed. Now in the JavaScript, I link to the click event of the button. And in here, I grab the value from the input. And now I display the value in the div. Again, by accessing it using jQuery. Now, in addition, I define an array here, which is called values. And I also add the value I grab from the input to this. However, since I would like to deal with integers, I just convert this to a number. And now we need to know that everything that is attached to the app variable in a micro app is exported and thereby visible to other micro apps. I go back to the original micro app and drag and drop the list onto the HTML. That will embed this micro app into the 2 kilometer run micro app. Now, if I click on the button, I would first like to grab the values from this list and then submit them to the service we have developed in the second core tutorial. To link to the service, I can again just drag and drop it onto my code, the JavaScript here in particular. Now I also need to submit a JSON message, and calling the service requires calling the apply method. I'll just make a little bit more space here, which returns with the result from the service. So now let's go to composing the JSON message. And here our service expected one property, numbers. So that makes the message complete. Now we need to deal with the result. If there's something in the variable x, then this indicates something went wrong with calling our service. And we just issue an alert here. And otherwise, REST contains the JSON object created by our service. But before, we need to have a little space where we can display the result. I just use a span here. Grab this attribute to identify it. Again with the little jQuery query. Never to forget the alum. And so what we want to display here is simply a property of the return JSON and specifically the average property. Now we can quickly test this app. Just adding some numbers here and then clicking calculate average. And it returns us the correct average. One thing to note here is that you might be wondering where the rest of our HTML is. So the HTML we have to find on the HTML tab is of course what is essential for our app. But we all know there's some other stuff required to make a complete HTML page. This HTML is what we call the wrapper used for the app. The wrapper HTML can be accessed through this button here. Usually we use a pre-made template like this with some core dependency defined already for us, but you can change it to anything you like. We can also deploy this app into production. For this, we go to the Deploy tab and deploy it. This will compile the app with all its dependencies into a nicely packaged bundle. If we change the app or any of its dependencies, it won't affect this deployed version. Now I can open it, and it opens here. The performance of deployed apps is much better than those in a preview, since all dependencies are compressed into one file and the HTML of the page is pre-rendered during deployment. We can give the link generated during deployment to our users. The link can be accessed through here, but often we would like to give something with a little bit nicer URL. For this, we can use a domain object. I first search here for the domain object template. Select it, and I give it the name 2km. With a domain object, I can either use a free subdomain on ObjectHub, or I can link it to my own domain if I can set the DNS records for this domain. I just provide a domain name here and go back to the browser and to my objects I've created and drag and drop the 2km RAN app into here. Just click link this domain and object, and now I just set it here to use the production version. and the app is now available on this subdomain. So now we have shown how to create a web service and link this web service with a web application. In the next tutorial, I'll be showing how to work with persisted data.